All right, let's jump right in. I want you to picture this. It's around 600 BCE in the Ganga Valley of India. For centuries, life has been organized around clans and tribes. But now, all of that is melting away. And in its place, something bigger, more powerful is being born. This is an age of clashing armies, brand new cities popping up, and radical new ideas that are about to change the world forever. So it makes you wonder, what does it really take to build an empire from the ground up? Is it just about having brilliant leaders, or maybe superior technology? Is it a revolutionary new idea that catches fire? Or is it something a little more fundamental? That's the big question we're going to tackle, using the blueprint left behind by ancient India's very first states. We're zooming in on this incredible era known as the Mahajanapada period. And the name itself tells you a lot. It literally means the great territories of the people. This was the moment in history, the critical turning point, when society shifted from being all about kinship and who you were related to formal states built on territory, taxes, and armies. And believe me, this wasn't just a simple political shuffle. It was a total transformation of society. I mean, for the first time in centuries, large cities were reappearing across the subcontinent. Iron technology suddenly became common, which completely changed the game for both farming and for warfare. And right in the middle of all of this chaos, brand new philosophies were emerging that challenged the very foundations of how people saw the world. Now, at the absolute heart of this era was a huge political clash. It was a battle between two completely different ways of thinking about power, a real showdown between absolute monarchies on one side and something else entirely on the other: ancient republics. And the difference between them couldn't be more stark. So on one side, you've got kingdoms like Magadha. They're ruled by a single hereditary king, a Raja, with absolute centralized power. But then you have the Ganasangas, these republics, where power was spread out among a council of nobles. They made decisions together in an assembly. So it's basically top-down control versus a kind of collective aristocratic rule. And that term, Gana Sangha, is really important. Let's break it down. Gana basically means a group of equals, and Sangha means an assembly. Now, these weren't democracies like we think of them today, not even close. They were really oligarchies, run by the heads of powerful warrior families who would all meet together to govern. It was an older, clan-based system really fighting to survive in this new world. But as history so often shows us, these two systems couldn't coexist forever. One was bound to come out on top. So let's follow the story of how one of these kingdoms, the powerhouse state of Magadha, began its relentless march to build India's first real empire. So what was Magadha's secret sauce? Well, it was like they hit the geographical jackpot. Their lands were incredibly fertile, producing huge surpluses of rice that could feed giant armies. They controlled rich deposits of iron ore, perfect for making stronger weapons and better tools. Their forests gave them tons of timber and, most importantly, war elephants, the literal tanks of the ancient world. And to top it all off, their location on the Ganga River gave them total control over the main highway of trade and communication. This advantage wasn't just sitting there. It was ruthlessly exploited by a series of incredibly ambitious dynasties. You had King Bimbisara, who used a mix of strategic marriages and straight-up conquest to expand his territory. Then his son, the infamous Ajatashatru, waged a long, brutal war to finally crush the powerful Vriji Republic. But the real game changers? Oh, that was the Nandas. They perfected the art of tax collection, built a colossal army, and started thinking on a truly imperial scale. And to win this fight, especially against those tough republics, the kings of Magadha didn't just rely on numbers. They brought out the big guns, literally. Their technological edge was just devastating. Ajatashatru is said to have used these incredible new weapons. One was the Mahashalaka Kantaka, and yeah, that's a mouthful, but it was basically a giant catapult that could hurl massive stones to smash city walls. The other was the Rathamushala, a chariot with a terrifying swinging mace attached to it. Imagine trying to face that with old-school spears and shields. The Republican armies just stood no chance. And here's where the story gets really interesting, a total plot twist. The Nanda dynasty, the guys who truly laid the groundwork for empire, were not from the traditional warrior class, the Kshatriyas. Ancient sources say they were of low or Shudra origin. Now this was a huge deal. It was a shocking break from tradition, and it sent a clear message. In this new age, raw power and ambition mattered more than the old social rulebook. But hold on. Armies, cities, and empires, they don't run on air. They don't just appear out of nowhere. You need an engine, a powerful economic engine, to fuel all that change. So let's take a look at the forces that made this whole transformation possible. And the key ingredient, the one thing that kicked it all off? One word: iron. Specifically, the widespread use of the iron-tipped plowshare. The seemingly simple tool was a revolution. It allowed farmers to slice through the tough, heavy soil of the Ganga Plain, which led to a massive increase in food production. That agricultural surplus was the rock-solid foundation that everything else was built on. Okay, so now you have all this extra food and all these extra goods. The old system of bartering just becomes too slow and clunky. And that leads to another huge revolution: the widespread use of money. These little punch-marked coins, made of silver and copper, completely changed commerce. Suddenly, you could tax people in a systematic way, you could pay professional soldiers, and you could have complex, long-distance trade. Even lending and finance started to take off. So who was running this new, buzzing urban economy? It wasn't just individual merchants. It was these incredibly powerful groups called shrenis, or guilds. And these weren't just social clubs. They were powerful corporate bodies. They controlled everything, from getting the raw materials, to setting quality standards and prices, to marketing the final goods. They were so powerful that their own internal rules were respected as if they were actual law. Now, whenever a society goes through this much change this fast, when cities are booming, a whole new wealthy class is rising up, and old political systems are being violently destroyed, it's not just the politics and the economy that get shaken up. People's minds do too. You start questioning everything. And that is exactly what happened. The old guard, Vedic Brahmanism, with its focus on ancient secret texts, complex rituals, and a very rigid birth-based social hierarchy, was suddenly challenged by a new wave of thinkers. These were the Shramanas. They rejected the old authorities and instead focused on individual action, on karma. They were basically saying, hey, maybe it's not about which family you're born into, but about how you choose to live your life. And here is the most incredible connection in this entire story. The two most influential leaders of this whole intellectual revolution, Mahavira, who founded Jainism, and the Buddha himself, they both came from noble Kshatriya families inside the Gana Sanghas. Think about that. The greatest new thinkers came from the very political system that was being wiped off the map. So what were they offering people? Two very different paths away from the chaos and suffering of the world. Jainism taught liberation through intense self-discipline and an absolute commitment to nonviolence, ahimsa, because they believed every single thing, even a rock, has a soul. Buddhism, on the other hand, offered a middle path, a balanced approach that avoided the extremes of luxury and self-torture to achieve nirvana, an end to suffering. And check out how their political ideas reflected where they came from. Instead of the idea of a king who is chosen by the gods, Buddhist texts talk about something that sounds a lot like a social contract. They say that in the beginning, people got together and elected a leader, the great elect, and they agreed to pay him a wage, which is basically taxes, in exchange for him maintaining law and order. This is a rational, human-based idea for a state, totally different from divine right. So who was listening to all this? Who was funding these new movements? You guessed it, that new, wealthy merchant class. See, they had the money, they had the economic power, but the old Brahmanical system didn't give them high social status. Buddhism and Jainism, which said that your actions matter more than your birth, were a perfect match. It gave them a path to social prestige that their money alone couldn't buy. Which brings us all the way back to our big question. The story of the Mahajanapadas is incredible. It shows how a technological shift, the use of iron, unleashed economic forces that funded a whole new political system, the empire. And that massive social and political disruption, in turn, sparked new philosophies that completely reshaped how people thought about life itself. And it leaves us with one last thing to think about. Does profound economic change always, inevitably, end up reshaping our deepest beliefs?